And I remember being in meetings saying to people, I said, hey, everyone, I have a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in A, B, C, D. Like, I can help you. You should lean on me. And I remember they looked at me blankly. And I remember thinking, that's kind of weird. Like, don't you want me to help you?
The team that got you here is usually the team that starts to break as you grow. Not because they're bad, but because what worked at 10 people doesn't work with 30, doesn't work with 100. Communication slips, decisions stall. People start working harder, but getting less done. And most leaders don't realize what's actually causing it. Today, we get into what's really breaking inside your team as you scale and what it takes to lead through it. I'm Dr. Gary, and this is Leading from the Front. My guest today is Alice Coe, founder of Reframed Coaching and Consulting. Alice started her career as a CPA at KPMG, moved into marketing leadership roles across startups and global brands like Louis Vuitton and Aritzia, and now works with founders and leadership teams to help them build high-performing teams. What she's seen over and over again is that teams don't fall apart because people aren't capable. They fall apart because leaders don't know how to navigate what happens when pressure hits. What that actually looks like and how leaders learn to fix it is what this episode is about. I'm interested in hearing how you made this transition from being a CPA at KPMG, right? People always have this, perception of what a CPA is at these accounting firms, these business firms, I think they are, and you became a coach.
That's right.
How did that happen? What caused, there had to be a mind shift, unless you were just doing that when you were at KPMG.
I was not actually, Dr. Gary. I never had the intention. Some people were born with, maybe they're really good public speakers or they always knew that they were going to be a coach. I never ever thought that. So the reason I made the transition was out of necessity. Maybe you could relate to this. So yes, I was a CPA. I worked in finance for many years, for the first 7, 8 years of my life. KPMG, Big Four, corporate, Louis Vuitton, Remy, Aritzia, like big companies. Yeah. And then I actually did this assessment called the Strengths Finder. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Great.
Very.
I did the Strengths Finder assessment and I changed my career because of that. Not yet to strengths though. So my assessment told me, hey, you should work more in the startup entrepreneurial environment, maybe more in the creative space, which I had always wanted to do. So that Strengths Finder assessment really gave me the motivation and the push to do that. And so I first switched from finance into marketing. And then from marketing, I really found my sweet spot working at startups. It was like a mid-2015 era when startups were getting a lot of funding, a lot of attention, and I naturally made my way towards that area. Then I became a manager, and being a manager is very different than being an individual contributor, as you'll know. And I didn't receive any training to become a manager, definitely not at a startup. You've heard it, right? And so what happened was I was managing this team. I think I started with maybe three people, but the entire department was about 10. Honestly, it was really dysfunctional. I'm not going to lie. It was dysfunctional. It was ineffective. It was inefficient. Nobody was taking charge. People weren't getting along. There was a lot of blame. And I thought to myself, well, this isn't the best way to do things. And because I had come from larger organizations that were a bit more structured, like KPMG or Louis Vuitton, I knew there has to be a better way. And then I took it upon myself. I said, I think I have to be the one to make things better here. And I remembered the Strengths Finder assessment and how helpful that was to recognizing first how people are wired differently. And so with that team I was on, I basically just brought it in. I said, hey, we're going to do a fun team building exercise. I asked my CMO for permission. She said, yep, go for it. So I did this team building exercise as a marketing department. And Dr. Gary, it worked. When I say it worked, people started recognizing, wow, I had all these assumptions about other people and I was wrong. I realized that I'm wired differently and I have all these strengths. And that is actually what catapulted me into coaching. I thought, okay, well, if this worked, that's great. Why don't I go get a certification so I can talk about Strengths Finder in a credible way? So through that, I started doing more education around coaching, and my coaching mentors and instructors told me, oh, you're kind of good at this. Have you ever thought about doing this full time? I had not, but that's what really catapulted me into, okay, well, but maybe I should. Thank you for bringing that idea to the forefront. So that's how I made the shift.
Like so many of us, it's fascinating to hear this because it was very well planned out, right, Alice? You had this plan of how to, no, it was situational. Comes on opportunity, if you will. Similar things happen, right? We use actually strength-based leadership, which is based on strength finders, and allows us in leadership to organize people's strengths in executing skills, relationship building skills, influencing skills, and strategic thinking. So you take those 4 modalities and you can actually apply, what we do is we apply those modalities to problem solving capabilities. So for example, if you're going to problem solve and we say, okay, define the problem. Who should define the problem? Should it be the executors, the influencers, the relationship builders, or the strategic thinkers? Well, it needs to be the strategic thinkers because they're the ones that kind of see the whole picture and they can define it better. And then the executors might, put a little bit of detail into that. But you apply the right skill set with the right people in the right part of the process. Because what happens then is that you'll get with people that don't know this, and I'm sure you saw this when you get strength finders and you get people using their strengths, when people step outside of their strengths for ego reasons or for I'm the boss, I'm supposed to know, or for whatever. As a consultant, I can sit there and go, no, Alice, you need to keep your mouth shut because Joe over there, he's the strategic thinker and you don't have one of those strengths. So just cool it. You're going to get your opportunity and let's move on. So I'm sure that you had opportunity with the teams and the coaching and things where you were able to use those strengths on teams more effectively.
There's so many. Okay. Well, actually it was this first company, and I love that you also believe in strengths-based leadership. It's really, really powerful. To your point, it's very powerful if you can remove the ego. It's very powerful if you can recognize, you know what, I do have strengths. I had one person say to me once, well, I have all 34 of them. I said, I think you're missing the point of this. Okay. So the story I'll tell you is, I actually managed somebody, if we're going to use the terminology, their number one strength was ideation. Mm-hmm. So ideation is the strength, somebody who naturally is very creative, somebody who naturally can brainstorm and give you 50 ideas in 5 minutes. The idea of coming up with new, novel concepts is just easy for them. And they were having a really hard time working with a designer. So this person I was working with, they were an events manager, and they often had to work with a designer to, design materials for the events. They were having a really hard time working together. And after we did the strengths assessment, this individual realized, wow, I didn't realize that I was actually overwhelming the creative designer because I was coming to meetings, flooding her with 20, 30 ideas. And then she would freeze. She didn't resonate with that. That didn't excite her as much as it excited me because the designer didn't have ideation strength. And so when you give people the opportunity to sit back and say, you know what, I have the strength and it might be an overdrive sometimes, and I need to learn how to use it effectively. That can be very powerful. So she learned not to go to that meeting with 20, 30 ideas. It was a very polished, I think it was 5 concepts. Here's 5 concepts that we can then brainstorm and expand on together rather than me sit here and just throw idea after idea to you. So that's a basic example that comes to my mind.
It gives people a foundation and understanding of self-awareness, which is what we teach at the core of our leadership development programs, is self-awareness. I talk about this all the time when we do the strength-based leadership training. And I think that I read something on your LinkedIn about this that resonates with this. And it was this. People that have strengths find that they don't recognize those strengths because it's easy. And we're taught in our life, if you're going to do anything really well, it's hard to learn those skills, and it doesn't come easy. You got to work hard. You got to show grit. And all of that's true. Effort needs to be there. And even with talents from strength finders, they talk about this. The talent that you might demonstrate on this assessment has to be developed into a strength by, first of all, knowing you've got it, then training it, developing it, executing it, practicing it, working on it, recognizing it, and then rinse and repeat, because these strengths don't become strengths overnight. So it sounds like you did this, you turned your first team around.
You know what? I never thought about it in that way, but yes, I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I appreciate that you emphasize that a talent needs to be developed into a strength and that people take their strengths for granted. And that is definitely something that they emphasize in strengths-based psychology. There's something called, I think it's something along the lines of sophistication bias, that we tend to overlook things that come easy or seem a little bit too easy. What do you mean? All I have to do is play to my strengths. What do you mean, Dr. Gary? All you have to do is do what naturally comes easy to you and you'll be successful? Nah, that doesn't sound realistic. I got to work harder. No, people actually, you're right. People have a hard time absorbing that concept.
One of the things that you talk about, I really like this concept where you said when teams or organizations grow, it requires different leadership and management capabilities, right? And I think you were talking about 10 to 30 because you work a lot with entrepreneurial organizations. Well, I can say 10 to 30, 30 to 300, 300 to 3,000. It all requires a different set of skills. Talk a little bit about how you've had to transition companies because of growth, because of size, and how you go about doing that.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm glad you called out also that there is a difference in terms of a size when you're scaling and needing different leadership capabilities. Well, we've mentioned this before. Number one, self-awareness is really important. So we can talk about this from a company perspective and the individual perspective. So usually what happens when a company is small and they're scaling, they realize, oh my goodness, we need layers of management. We need team leads. Hey, why don't we just promote the people that we already have? They're doing such a great job. They have a lot of institutional knowledge about the company, the industry, and the product. We're just going to promote everyone internally. And they think that's great. And they think it builds morale. And guess what it does? Temporarily, if you set them up for success, because the company needs to have the awareness to acknowledge, you know what? We're promoting people into positions of management and leadership, but the promotion in itself is not enough. We have to set them up for success. And the success usually looks like some type of combination of one-on-one type of learning and coaching and training, group-based coaching, learning, and training. And then I love this word, and you used this before as well, application, because people need to learn how to operationalize the concepts and the new tools they learn into the work itself. But a lot of companies aren't aware that they need actually those three things to set people up for success. And then on the flip side of that, the people who are then managers and leaders also need to have the same recognition that the tools that got me to where I am now aren't the tools that are going to get me to where I'm going to be going next. So again, they also have to recognize, I need a new skill. I've never delegated before. I've never given feedback before. I've never held someone truly accountable. How do I learn that? So when a company acknowledges this and an individual acknowledges this, and then you actually give them the resources, somebody like Dr. Gary or somebody like me to come in with a program, that is how you can truly get a company to scale successfully. I had a vice president that was newly promoted, and in the positions that he'd been in before, he didn't have hiring and firing authority, but now he did. Okay, so it's a different skill. It's a different responsibility and authority, and it requires some coaching. And I was coaching him, and we were working through this. And he had a gentleman that was doing something that was unacceptable. In fact, a little bit illegal, and not illegal in terms of criminally illegal, but illegal against procedure in the company. And he was caught, and he was told to stop doing it. So he did. A few months later, caught the guy doing it again. And I said, so what are you going to do? And he says, well, I need to fire him. I said, I think that's a good decision, because if you don't, it's going to reflect on, you and everybody else. So he made this excuse. He kept excusing it. He's working on this project. I got to help him finish this. And we kept excusing. The president supported him. The CEO supported him. But he's new. So they were very patient. All right. It's their first time to fire somebody, right? It's hard. It's difficult. You're thinking about their family. They cared about people. After about 3 or 4 months, I said, so have you done it yet? And I was in a coaching session with him. And he says, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I said, you know what? Never mind about him. It's okay. You don't have to worry about him anymore. And he goes, wow. I don't? I said, no, not a problem. He said, but I said, no, it's not a problem. He says, you see, you're the problem. And if you don't fire him, they will find somebody that will. Therefore, they don't need you anymore. So why don't you just decide to go back into your old job? Because no, I said, hey, I'm just telling you, you either take care of this or you're going to be replaced. Your choice. Okay. These are the kinds of things we get to say sometimes, Alice. So I said, he says, I'm going to take care of it. I said, you've said that to me 3 or 4 times. By when? He says, this week. I'm like, okay, we'll see. Well, Thursday he was gone. He called me and he said he fired him. He took care of it. And the CEO sat him down and he says, it's a good thing you did this, because this was really a bad reflection on the entire company, what this guy was doing. And we were just waiting for you to get to the point where you were going to do your job. So welcome to the executive level. Wow, you gave them real talk. And I love that word, the buy when. The buy when is really important. I was working with a mid-size accounting firm. Same story, really strong individual contributors. The company starts to grow. So then you naturally promote your most high performing individual contributors, in this case, accountants, into supervisors. Company culture was very, very nice. I'm sure you've met companies like this. Everyone's just nice, pleasant, don't really want to hurt anyone's feelings. So they just say nothing. But what happens is you say nothing, resentment starts to build because people who don't meet deadlines, and therefore people start to get resentful. And so what we did was 3 things. At a company level, we did company-based strengths training. So everybody had the language to recognize, hey, this is how I'm uniquely wired. That was the first thing we did. The second thing we did was then take all the supervisors who didn't have manager training before and put them into group-based training with me, where they would learn general topics like how to give feedback. Why is it important? Here's how you do it. Here's how you adjust your mindset. And then the third level, which is the story I'm going to tell you, is then, but you need to also get that one-on-one time in, which is what you did in your story. So this one supervisor, their strengths were naturally very high in relationship building, high positivity, high empathy, high harmony, just an overall people person. And they hated delivering feedback. They hated having any difficult conversation. But what had happened was there was a very, very difficult team member that they had to manage. They were rude to clients. They were rude to internal team members. They pushed back on her, the supervisor. They refused to go to meetings. And they just kept letting this behavior go. And I said, what do you actually want to happen with this individual? And the supervisor said to me, I want her to start speaking with respect to clients and internal team members. I want them to start showing up to meetings that we scheduled. I'm like, these are great basic things. Have you given them this feedback? Have you made it very clear what your expectations are as a supervisor? And she said, no, I haven't. And I said, well, this may seem basic to you, and at a different level, I would argue this is baseline type of behavior that you should expect at an organization. But at the same time, if you're not communicating this to the individual, if you're not giving them clear feedback, why would they ever do anything differently? Why would they start showing up to meetings if you've never given them any feedback? They're just going to keep repeating the behavior until you give them feedback. And so what we did was we went through several different tools, and we actually did real-time practice because giving feedback was so difficult to her. We would have simulations where I would pretend to be that difficult team member. And I would sit here and I'd say, I'm going to be difficult and I want you to give me feedback because we are going to practice until you feel comfortable with it. And we did that until she finally was able to have a real conversation with that team member and say, hey, look, I've noticed there's a lot of things going on. We need to have a real conversation. And she practiced using the exact phrases and prompts that she used with me. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of it, they were able to actually clear the air and have a clearing conversation. There was a lot of misunderstandings on both ends, but hey, we actually thought this would be a situation where this person would need to be coached out. Instead, what has happened is this person has stayed at the company and they're actually thriving. So this is what happens when you give people the skills to have difficult conversations. You can actually have a turnaround situation. Not all the time, but you can at least try. And
I think, in leadership, words are so very important. And I think part of the problem that we have in leadership training like this is people don't like the word feedback. They don't like the word conflict. They don't like the word, and I even say it's a difficult conversation. Well, no, it's not a difficult conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation. Feel the discomfort and work through it. Okay. So let's work through the discomfort. And you did that by practicing. It's so important to practice that because you get what you tolerate and people need boundaries. My good friend, Dr. Vito, works with me and he's an industrial psychologist and he tells this story to understand boundaries that I love. And, imagine yourself on top of a 40-story building and that building is like 50 feet by 50 feet and it's absolutely flat, just a flat top of the building. And, so wind is 40, 50 miles an hour and you're on top of that building. How free are you going to be to move around on that flat surface, only, 25 feet from the edge? So, I've had people say, I'm just going to lay down. I'm going to sit down and I'm not going to move. I said, that's exactly right. It's not, you don't have the freedom to move. But if I put a 10-foot wall up, steel wall all the way around that roof, how free are you to move? You'll move all over the place because you're free with the boundaries to move on the roof. The idea here is people need to understand where their movement is allowed, where they have the authority, and where they don't. And to your point, that's why I like to call it, performance management, performance feedback, whatever it might be, to allow people to understand what their performance needs to be and where the boundaries are. No, you can't do that. You can't just not show up for meetings. That's not acceptable. Show up for the meeting. Do you need to understand why you need to be at these meetings? What value that meeting has? And in some cases, many years ago, worked on some of this stuff with safety, Alice. And you tell people, I need you at the meeting. Well, I just need you at the meeting. You have to be there and experience it to understand the value of it. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to show up. You will show up to the meeting, and we'll work with the people in the room to make sure that there's some value with that.
I cannot agree more. I repeat that saying a lot as well, where values aren't what you write on your website. Well, values aren't your buzzwords. Your culture is not your values. Your culture is what you tolerate.
One of the things that I came across is growth doesn't break teams. It exposes them. I have a phrase that's very similar to it. Crisis doesn't build character. It reveals it. Both of those phrases are very similar, right? So again, going back, when you work with teams, and you've talked about, you've talked about feedback. You've talked about, work on people's strengths so that they understand how to behave in a way that's consistent with their strengths. You've talked about performance management and setting goals. But I want to talk a little bit about what I think is the single most important leadership skill that a leader has to have. And that's coaching, the ability to coach, the ability to ask questions. All right. So I'm going to give you a quick example. You talk about this person that they're not showing up for a meeting. So here's how the coaching goes. You're going to combine a statement of fact with a question. So it'd be, Alice, you haven't come to the meeting the last 3 times. What's going on? And you just shut up. Just stop. Right? It's coach her out. And by having the conversation, it sounds like she ended up being a good employee.
Exactly. Because you make a statement, like you said, ask a question, and then you listen.
I say, first of all, before you listen, shut up. It's just, you've got to close the lips, and then you can hear what the other person has to say. I think, what's your experience with this? I think that people try to explain way too much when they're trying to give feedback. They get diarrhea of the mouth. Oh, Alice, well, we have these meetings and we're doing this and we're doing that and we want you to show up and I'd really like you to come if you could, please, maybe, and they go on and on like this. And it's like, no, it's just like, you haven't been in the last 3 meetings. What's going on? Just, that's it.
Yeah.
5 seconds. What's happening? 5 seconds. How do you help people overcome that discomfort?
Shutting up and listening.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Oh, so you actually practice what you teach? Is that what you're saying, Alice?
I mean, I do that sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah. So I will actually, I'll throw it back at them, obviously, depending on the nature of the relationship. But if I'm one-on-one coaching someone and they're having a hard time saying, how do I just get them to talk? How do I get them to share? How do I get them to explain? I say, well, have you ever noticed that in our coaching sessions, I'll ask you a question and I just let you talk? And in talking, you share more. And in talking, you actually come up with your own solution often. So they'll say, oh yeah, yes, I do realize that. Less is more. And I think the other thing I say a lot is clarity creates calm. Clarity creates calm, and then that creates results. And every leader wants results, right? And so I'll say something along the lines of, what is your goal going into a conversation with someone? And usually that goal is going to be something around the lines of, yeah, I do want to know what's happening. I do want to know why they're not showing up to a meeting. I want to know why they didn't meet the deadline. I want to know why they're so stressed out. So their goal is often to seek clarity. And so I will tell them, if your goal is to seek clarity, you're not going to get that clarity by you talking. You're not going to get clarity by you making assumptions. The only way you're going to get clarity is to let the other party speak. And then you can do things like mirror, validate, ask more questions, but your sole purpose is to get clarity. Clarity, clarity, clarity. Once you get that clarity, you can probably set boundaries, expectations, alignment, and that's when you're going to see the change to behavior from the other person. I don't know if you have a different approach.
No, that's absolutely perfect. but I like the simplicity of it, is going in with the mindset of clarity. We have a phrase that we always say going into it, be curious, not critical.
The level of assumptions that people make, and I mean, we all do it. You do it, I do it, we all make assumptions. And I think when you really realize that most of my opinions are based on assumptions and not facts, based on what I heard from the other person, it is a reality check. The other thing I like to do is I tell new managers and leaders, your role is to be either a CCO, Chief Curiosity Officer, or a CQO, which is a Chief Question Officer. That is your role. So to your point around the, I forget what was it that your father said?
Curious, not critical.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The best leaders, I think the ones that most of us look up to, if you really were to look into it, they are curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in building teams, we got growth, right? And I was thinking about this, you've got an individual contributor, or maybe they've got some talent, so they become a supervisor, they become a manager, they become an executive. What do you think the bit different skills are at these different levels with companies that grow? And when you look at these, I don't know if we would be able to do this, but would we be able to connect some of the talents from Strength Finders that fit those roles more effectively? Because the talents of a supervisor and the strengths of a supervisor are very different than an executive.
Yes, similar but different. And actually, I would be curious about the strengths, maybe categories that your team uses. So the formal definition in the world of Gallup is 4 domains. And I agree with you. These domains will differ if you're a supervisor, mid-manager versus executive leader. So number 1 is strategic thinking. I would say from a supervisor or management side, that strategic thinking is important because you're often going to be the one creating a plan. Whereas from the leadership side, that strategic thinking comes from creating the vision, right? Vision for the company, vision for where we're going. Okay. The second domain is going to be influencing. So it's not enough to have a great strategy if you cannot influence and motivate other people to go along with it. So this is really characterized by, can you mobilize a group of people to get inspired, a group of people to take action? It's not so focused on the one-on-one. So some typical strengths under influencing that we are probably familiar with are, somebody who is very commanding. If you think about, maybe we'll take the army as an example, right? Somebody who's just a natural leader, somebody who feels very comfortable making hard decisions in the face of chaos or in the face of lack of information for a group, and they can just take charge and go. Or somebody who is very competitive, and they can kind of like get a team of people to be inspired to beat a benchmark or to overcome a challenge. And I would say, again, from a management supervisor side, I think the influencing is more important on the one-on-one level. And then on an executive level, the influencing is more important on a group level. The third domain is going to be relationship building. So relationship building tells us, how do you build relationships with others? Some people are very naturally empathetic. They can pick up on how other people feel. Other people are naturally very positive. They see the glass half full. They can kind of just make everyone feel like they're in a good mood. Other people are natural mentors. Other people are naturally very harmonious and they're good mediators. Again, I think from a supervisor, middle management perspective, the relationship building on a one-on-one level is most important, meaning you have to be able to identify the individual strengths of everybody on your team and know how to get everyone individually to play to strengths. Whereas I would argue on an executive level, the relationship building becomes more important because you need to get buy-in from your peers. So it's less about how can I build a relationship so I can get them to do things. It's more about how can I build a relationship so they can buy into what my vision is for the department or the company. And then finally, the fourth domain is executing. These are the talents and strengths that tell us, how does someone get things done? From a middle manager supervisor perspective, well, you need to make sure things get done. You have to make sure business as usual is moving in your department, in your team. So I would actually argue that a lot of middle managers I know are often in the weeds themselves. They have to tick the box or review this, push this, shift that. Whereas from the executive level, chief level, the execution probably comes from, can I push this plan through? Can I finish this budget for the department? You're probably not as in the weeds with the specifics of a project, but you have to get higher level, more strategic projects going. What do you think?
I like those descriptions. I'm going to have to listen to this video podcast to collect all that because that was fantastic. That's a great example of how the domains fit with those, but how those domains have different nuances. Okay. There's still all 4 of the domains need to be at all levels, but the execution of those domains is slightly different based on the level and the needs of the organization. That's really well done, Alice. Really well done.
Of course, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. And of course, it depends on the organization and the product and the service that you're selling.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's wrap this thing up with one last question. And one of the things that we do in our leadership program is we tell people that if they're going to learn a new skill, that they're going to screw it up. You're going to make a mistake. And coaching is the most important skill because coaching, first of all, connects the 2 scientifically correlated characteristics of leadership effectiveness, which is emotional intelligence and decision-making judgment. They're the only 2 measurable scientifically correlated characteristics of leadership effectiveness. Coaching, as you said, questioning, combines emotional intelligence and judgment in an interaction with a person or a group in the moment. Takes a lot of skill. So we tell people, you're going to screw it up, but go out and practice and practice and practice. But we want you to also do this. Occasionally, you'll have a one-on-one coaching session. You're going to completely screw it up. I'd like you to think about what went wrong. And the next day, go up to that person and say, for example, hey, Alice, I tried to coach you yesterday. That didn't go so well. Listen, I'd like to have a do-over. Would it be okay if we tried it again? I want to try again because I'm working on this skill. So my question to you, Alice, is when you look back at all of this stuff that you've been doing, what could you have done over? What do you look at and say, gee, I wish I had, maybe done this a little bit more or gone on this path or maybe adjusted this way? Is there anything that you could share with us that you would have preferred to have done over?
Oh, so much. This is me as a manager. Oh, there's so much. Okay. So many things come to mind. Maybe I'll share a few examples. So one example is I remember I started a company as a pretty senior. So I was definitely not the most junior person on the team. I was quite experienced. And I came in barging in, just trying to make myself like embedded in every single project without building the right relationships first. And wow, did I learn from that. And I remember being in meetings saying to people, I said, hey, everyone, I have a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in A, B, C, D. You all should lean on me. Like, I can help you. You should lean on me. And I remember they looked at me blankly. And I remember thinking, that's kind of weird. Like, well, don't you want me to help you? But it's because I hadn't spent the time building the right relationships first. So now in hindsight, I realized they were thinking, who is this individual who just barged in thinking she knows everything, thinking we're just going to ask her to help us on all our projects. So that was a big mistake on my part. I learned pretty fast after that. And actually, when I think back to it, I mean, it's kind of a lot of these are really the ones that I would do over are ones when it related to other people, right? Sure, I could have used a different management tool, like a different project management tool. I could have did my budgeting and timeline differently, but the ones I really wished I did, I had the chance to do over were the ones related to people. Just not spending the proper time building the right relationship. Even if I said to myself, okay, you know what? We had a one-on-one. I got to know them personally. I asked about their family. I asked about their pets. We're good. No. We were not good. There was still a lot of work to be done around, well, what are our working styles? How do we want to work better together? How do you communicate? How do you like to receive feedback? How do you want to receive feedback from me? There's just so much more I could have done.
Yeah, that's, I could probably take exactly what you said and restate it in my own life, having done exactly the same thing. Oh, sure. I mean, you go into these situations, you think you know the answers and you're going to take over. And because we're trying to prove ourselves, we're showing our ego with that instead of respecting other people's history and position and expertise and education and strengths. No, we're going to go in there and prove to people because, well, in school we had to get the A's, so we had to prove to the teacher that I knew what I was doing. And we still have that mindset when we go into business. And so many times I did the same thing where when I remember coming out of the Army and trying to prove myself at Procter & Gamble, where I worked, and I was not a good team member. I was not.
Really?
And I look back on it and I'm like, I did my job. I was not disrespectful or anything, but I didn't really spend the time with everybody. There were some people that I did a really good job building and helping, but I could have done a lot better. I could have done a lot better job.
Okay, well, that makes me feel better, Dr. Gary, if you made the same mistakes that I did.
Yeah. Well, I think that we want to show people that we have some value. And the challenge with that, Alice, like for me, is that when you're younger in anything, you don't feel that you're a valuable person. You know, everything in leadership is from the inside out. And that's why, by the way, our definition of leadership has nothing to do with influence. The definition of leadership is the ability to build relationships so we can achieve our goals together with compassion and accountability.
Wow.
It starts with building relationships. Yep.
That's leadership in a nutshell. Absolutely. So you can get compassionate accountability because all companies want accountability, but you need the relationships as a precursor to get there.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm totally aligned.
Alice, I want to thank you for your time and your wisdom today. This has been fantastic. And I really appreciate you sharing your stories and your insights. I know people can learn a lot from this, some of your stories and your conversation about coaching and what you did with people. I really appreciate you being on the program. Thank you so much. If your team is slowing down as you grow, it's easy to blame the people. But most of the time, it's not a people problem, it's a leadership problem. What got you here doesn't scale on its own. And if you don't adjust how you lead, the team pays for it. If that resonates, send this to someone who's feeling that shift right now. Subscribe to Leading from the Front, and I'll see you in the next one.